I still remember that morning as clearly as if it had just happened yesterday. Seattle was cold and misty, Lake Union hidden under a silver-gray haze. I went to work early, like every other day, a cup of hot coffee in hand as I stepped into the glass tower of Atlas Digital, the place I had worked for 12 years. Atlas had started as a tiny team in the founder's garage. Back then, I was the infrastructure and data compliance engineer, the one who stayed up nights patching bugs, the one who signed off every system audit before the company even had a legal department. I was never the face of Atlas, never the decision maker, but everyone knew things ran smoothly because I made sure they did. I used to joke that I was Atlas's background software, invisible. But if I stopped working, everything would crash. Ethan Cole, the new CEO, was the only son of the founder, Richard Cole. He was barely past 30, Stanford educated, a former financial consultant. He had that polished way of talking, always paired with a confident smile and a promise of breakthroughs. He loved buzzwords, performance culture, next generation, and fresh blood. I did not dislike him. I just saw in his eyes something I had seen before, the hunger of someone who had never truly fallen. That morning, the company held its first town hall under Ethan's leadership. The auditorium looked more like a stage set than a meeting room, with cameras, spotlights, and a giant LED screen flashing the words, "A New Era for Atlas." It was being streamed live to all branches. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation. I sat in the middle row, quiet as always. Ethan walked out, sharp suit, bright smile, talking about vision, about turning Atlas into the data hub of the century. People clapped and cheered. I watched, calm and still. His speech was polished, rehearsed to perfection, but in every sentence I heard ambition, not responsibility. After nearly 20 minutes, he paused. The light hit his face. I noticed his eyes flick toward my row. Something inside me stirred, a quiet instinct that something was about to happen. To move forward, Ethan said, lowering his voice, we must be willing to let go of the past. Sometimes that means saying goodbye to those who once helped us but who no longer fit the future of Atlas. The room went silent. I could hear the faint hum of the microphone. Ethan took a breath, then said clearly, Ava Clark, today is your last day at Atlas Digital. No one moved. A few gasped. Somewhere a spoon clattered to the floor. I looked at Ethan, that confident smile still on his lips, as if this was the moment he had been waiting for, his proof of control. Thank you for your contributions, he said. But Atlas needs new energy, new ways of thinking. I stood up, no anger, no shame, no fear, just a strange, quiet relief, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I unclipped my employee badge, held it for a moment. That badge had followed me through hundreds of security audits, through endless nights fixing emergency failures. I placed it gently on the table in front of me. Then I reached into my bag and took out a small silver USB drive, one I always carried. To anyone else, it was just a storage device. To me, it was the heart of Atlas. Inside it were the root authentication keys, the security protocols, and the operational framework I had built over 12 years. I walked slowly toward the stage where Ethan stood under the lights. I placed the USB on the podium and said clearly, my voice carrying through the microphone, Good luck, Ethan. You are going to need it. No one moved. The air thickened. I glanced around the room. Familiar faces, colleagues who had worked beside me for years, now silent, eyes lowered. I did not blame them. No one wants to stand too close to someone the system just erased. Ethan smiled, a touch nervous now, and nodded like he had completed a formal duty. Let us all thank Ava, he said, his voice straining for calm. But even the microphone could not hide the slight tremor. I turned and walked down the aisle. My heels echoed against the floor. The LED screen above glowed bright, its slogan looping endlessly, a new era for Atlas. The words felt like a cruel joke. Just before I reached the door, someone whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, he just fired the person who kept the company alive. I did not look back. I pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. The white fluorescent lights made everything look sterile and cold. I passed the tech wing, the sign on the wall. Still reading, Innovation Starts Here, a sign I had hung myself on opening day. In the lobby, I stopped for a moment, gazing at the building through the glass. The office floors glowed bright. On the big screen behind reception, Ethan was still on stage, arms spread, talking about the future. I watched for a second, then smiled, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who already knows what is coming. I stepped outside. Seattle rain brushed my face, cold but gentle. The streets shimmered, reflecting headlights like streams of flowing data. I stood under the awning for a moment, breathing deeply. There was no anger in me, only a strange calm, the kind that comes when a long chapter finally ends. I knew I had just lost my job, but I also knew Ethan had just shut down the only system keeping Atlas alive. I did not need to do anything. The system would speak for itself. I walked on, merging into the flow of people beneath the rain. Behind me, the lights of Atlas still burned bright, and somewhere inside, a man smiled confidently, unaware that he had just flipped the switch on himself. I left the Atlas building in the thin, cold rain of Seattle. Each step echoed heavily against the wet pavement. I did not cry. I did not feel anger. Only emptiness. 12 years of work, 12 years of keeping a system alive, dissolved into nothing. Yet strangely, I felt lighter. Maybe because, at last, I no longer had to hold together something others were so eager to destroy. My apartment was small, neat, on the 7th floor of an old building overlooking Lake Union. When I opened the door, the smell of old wood and cold coffee greeted me like an old friend. I hung up my coat, turned on the light, and sat at my desk. On my laptop screen, the Atlas digital logo still sat in the corner, so familiar it almost felt like part of me. I logged into my work account to check a few personal files. The moment I opened it, the inbox flashed dozens of automated messages. Authorization failure. Root token mismatch. I stared for a few seconds, then smiled faintly. They were trying to erase me from the system, not realizing I was the one who wrote the code that made that impossible. Ethan might have spoken loudly on stage, but the world of Atlas did not run on slogans. It ran on rules, authentication, and integrity, three things I doubted he fully understood. I took a sip of tea. The city lights shimmered through the window, reflecting on the desk. I remembered the day I signed my contract with the founder, Richard Cole, Ethan's father. He shook my hand and said, "I need someone who understands the system and is honest enough to protect it, even when I am gone." From that day, my name was listed as custodian of record, the sole root overseer of the system, and the legal representative to federal regulators. That meant that even though Ethan was CEO, without formal transfer procedures, I was still the only legally recognized custodian. And in his excitement, he had completely forgotten that. My phone buzzed. A message from Tina, head of human resources. "You okay, Ava?" "I can't believe he did that in the middle of the meeting," I replied. "I'm fine. Everything happens for a reason." She texted back right away. "Ethan said your old legacy. He thinks he's Steve Jobs." I typed. "The difference is, Jobs understood his company." I set the phone down and opened my laptop again. A new alert appeared. System access reauthentication required. I did not touch it. They were trying to reboot the system to change admin privileges, but they failed. The system required my original biometric signature. I had written that code myself, precisely for a moment like this, to make sure no one could bypass the law. I did not need to sabotage anything. I only needed to stop fixing it. And once I stopped, Atlas would tell the rest of the story. Outside, the rain had eased. I opened the window. Cold air swept in, carrying the faint scent of salt from the lake. The city lights rippled on the water, blinking like signals from afar. I thought of Ethan. He was probably in an emergency meeting by now, shouting at the tech team, blaming someone. He did not realize the chaos had only just begun. I stood, poured more hot water into my cup. The scent of jasmine tea filled the room. I sat back down and opened an old note file, one where I had written my own principles. A system is only strong when the one controlling it understands why it exists. Ethan would learn that, even if it came too late. I checked the clock. Almost midnight. The laptop glowed again, this time with a third alert. Unauthorized admin attempt detected. They were getting desperate. Maybe they had hired outside specialists. But the system was designed to lock all access when suspicious activity was detected. Every reckless move now would only pull them deeper. I leaned back, closed my eyes. The sound of rain faded, replaced by silence. A thick, calm silence. In that moment, I realized I no longer hated Ethan. I no longer wanted revenge. I only wanted things to unfold as they should. Justice does not always come from courts or headlines. Sometimes it comes from the system itself. When you break its balance, it will fight back. And Atlas, the system I had nurtured for 12 years, was ready to fight. I shut the laptop, turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the bedside lamp. In the dark, I heard the wind moving through the window, and in my mind, I could almost see the screens across the city lighting up with the same message I had just seen. Access denied. I smiled softly. It had begun, and this time I would not stop it. The next morning, I woke up later than usual. Sunlight poured through the window, glinting off the cold cup of tea left from the night before. I turned on the coffee machine, the bitter smell filling the apartment. Outside, Seattle was noisier than usual, the sound of cars, horns, and waves brushing against the lake. I picked up my phone and saw 12 missed calls from unknown numbers. One of them was from Atlas's office. I did not need to answer to know what was happening. When I opened my laptop, alerts flooded the screen. Error notifications from the Atlas system were automatically sent to my email, the reflex I had set up years ago. I clicked one. Badge system failure, cannot authenticate users. Another said, payroll authorization pending second key. I leaned back in my chair and gave a dry laugh. Everything I had predicted was unfolding faster than I expected. Across the city, I knew Ethan was facing the worst morning since he had taken the CEO chair. I could picture it clearly, employees crowding outside the building, their badges failing to scan, the internal email server down, and accounting unable to reach payroll data. And Ethan, furious, was yelling at the tech department. Around 9, Tina texted, Atlas is in chaos. No one can get in. He's losing it. I replied, they'll figure it out, or they won't. An hour later, my internal line rang. The number wasn't unfamiliar. It was Joe, the head of cybersecurity. I hesitated for a moment, then answered, Ava? His voice was tight with tension. Listen, the system's completely locked. No one has root access, not even me. They told me to ask if you left any credentials untransferred. I don't have anything to transfer, I said slowly. Ethan announced my termination. Legally, nothing under Atlas is my responsibility anymore. Joe exhaled. I know. But we can't function without the root authentication key. Payroll, contracts, and even building security depend on it. Joe, I said softly, you know I left instructions. The problem is, to open them, they need to understand the system. And I'm afraid Ethan never learned how. A silence followed. Then Joe said quietly, you knew this would happen. I just knew that when he fired the only person who understood the company, he'd finally learn his first real lesson. I hung up before he could say more. I walked out to the balcony. The sky was gray, and drizzle was returning. I looked toward downtown, where the Atlas building stood tall like a block of glass. Inside, I imagined people running everywhere. Part of me hoped they would manage to recover. The other part remained calm, knowing the system was only doing what it had been programmed to do, protect itself from unauthorized hands. By noon, my inbox was full again. Vendor access suspended, missing custodian authorization. Data compliance check failed. Network certificate expired. I read each one slowly, like reviewing a familiar report. None of those were technical failures. They were the direct consequence of Ethan believing administrative power could replace technical knowledge and legal order. I turned on the television. A local news anchor was reading a short update. Atlas Digital faces internal system disruptions, preventing hundreds of employees from accessing the network. Below, the company logo flickered, while the spokesperson said, the issue is being resolved. No data risk has been reported. I smiled. Of course, the data was safe. I had made sure of that. But because it was so well protected, they couldn't touch it. By late afternoon, the phone rang again. This time it was Ethan. I watched the screen, let it ring 3 times, then picked up. What the hell did you do to the system? His voice was sharp, controlled anger. No one can get in or out. Do you have any idea how much we're losing by the hour? I did nothing, I said. I just did my job, until I was told to stop. Now I have no authority to touch it. Don't play games with me, Ava. You need to unlock it right now. This is company property. Ethan, I said slowly. Clearly, everything you're asking has to go through the proper legal transfer process, and I don't see that process completed. So I can't help you. There was silence for a few seconds. Then his voice softened. Are you trying to get back at me? I answered calmly. I'm not getting back at you. I just stopped fixing things. I heard him exhale sharply, then the line went dead. I set the phone down and felt something close. Not a door, but an era. Ethan thought power alone could win. He didn't realize he was fighting the very system I had built to resist negligence. I sat still, looking out at the lights from the distant Atlas Tower. The sky darkened, the glass windows reflecting a faint golden glow. I knew the night ahead would be long for them. The system would keep locking down, sending alerts, blocking access, and finally, shutting everything off. I took a sip of cold tea. In the quiet room, only the soft patter of rain and the drip of the coffee machine remained. I thought maybe this silence was what I had been waiting for. Not to watch them fall, but to see them finally learn. Because when a system collapses not from attack but from neglect, it doesn't need to be destroyed. It only needs the one person who kept it alive to walk away. And after 12 years, I finally did. 2 days later, I sat in a small cafe by the lake, the place I always went when I needed quiet. Rain still fell in thin sheets, the cafe nearly empty, filled only with the scent of burnt coffee and the faint hum of old jazz. I opened my laptop and scrolled through the news. Atlas Digital was still on the front page of the business section. Internal failure disrupts Atlas systems. In the comments, someone wrote, heard they fired the head of compliance. Brilliant. Now the company locked itself out. I smiled, not out of satisfaction, but because everything was happening exactly as expected. My phone buzzed, unknown number, but I knew who it was. I let it ring a few times before answering. Ethan's voice came through, tight, controlled, trying to sound calm. We need to talk. I think there's nothing left to say, Ethan. This isn't an invitation. You know what's happening. 10 minutes, that's all. I paused, then agreed. Not out of curiosity, but because I wanted to see what he would say without a microphone and a spotlight. We met at a cafe inside one of the downtown office towers. Ethan arrived first, still in his expensive suit, but his eyes were ringed, his hair messy, tie half undone. When I reached the table, he stood up, forcing a polite smile. Ava, thank you for coming. I know this hasn't been easy, and maybe I moved too fast. I don't need an apology, I cut in. What do you need? He glanced around, then lowered his voice. The system isn't responding. Our partners are asking for confirmation from the original custodian. That's you. We just need you to sign a transfer form. Purely procedural. You sign, and everything goes back to normal. I looked at him. Outside the window, rain struck the pavement in a steady rhythm, lights splintering across puddles. I spoke slowly. You remember I once taught you how the system works, right? You also know that access isn't just a name or a number, it's trust. When you fired the person holding that trust without a proper transition, the system treated it as an intrusion. Ethan frowned, impatient. Ava, I didn't come here for a lecture. We can settle this. I'll compensate you. 3 times your current salary. I'll rehire you as a consultant. You just sign the authorization. That's it. I leaned back. You think I care about money? I spent my life building a system you've been using the wrong way. You don't understand it, or the people who kept it running. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening. I'm reminding you of the principle your father built this company on. Ethan gave a short, bitter laugh. Principles? Principles don't keep a company alive. Action does. And if you refuse to sign, I can sue you for obstruction. I met his gaze. You can try. But to win, you'll have to prove I still work for Atlas. And you, on stage, announced my permanent termination. That means I no longer have the authority to obstruct anything. The system is simply doing its job. His face tightened. He turned away, gripping his coffee cup hard. I could feel the anger in his shallow breaths. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost trembling. You know, Ava, you're not the hero here. You're just someone who couldn't let go, a piece of the past that refuses to disappear. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But that piece of the past is the only thing keeping your present from collapsing. When you cut it out, don't be surprised when everything falls apart. He stood abruptly, said nothing more, and tossed an envelope onto the table. Inside was a transfer agreement and a blank check. I didn't open it. I placed it back on the table, the same way I had placed that silver USB days ago. I'm not selling my conscience, I said. You'll have to find someone else. Ethan stopped at the door, looking back one last time. If this company falls, you gain nothing. I don't need to win, I replied. I just need things to be fair. The door closed behind him. Through the glass, I watched his figure shrink under the rain, disappearing into the traffic. I sat there for a while longer, fingers brushing the rim of my cold coffee cup. Inside, there was no anger left, only a quiet sadness. I knew I had just watched Ethan lose his last chance. When I got home, I opened my laptop. System alerts from Atlas flooded the screen. Payroll suspended, certificate invalid, server credentials expired. They must have tried everything, outside contractors, data recovery, even brute force access. But no one could break through the security layers I'd built. I opened an old file and reread a line I'd written years ago. A system stays strong only when the one in charge understands humility. I smiled, saved the file, and shut the laptop. That night, as wind whispered through the window, I knew the game had changed. Ethan no longer saw me as a former employee, but as an obstacle. And with men like him, when power is threatened, words are never the end. But I also knew he wasn't the first to believe he could break the rules built on time and trust, and he wouldn't be the last to learn otherwise. I turned off the lights and lay down. In the dark, I listened to the rain tapping gently against the glass. Somewhere across the city, Ethan was likely still in a meeting, his hands trembling over a pile of error reports. And me? After 12 years, I finally saw the system working exactly as it was meant to, not serving those who commanded it, but serving the truth. 3 days after the meeting, it was raining again in Seattle. I woke up late, turned on the radio while making coffee, and heard the newscaster's voice echo through the small speaker. Latest update. Atlas Digital is facing a severe data crisis after its system remained paralyzed for several days. Internal sources report the issue began after the sudden termination of a senior security and compliance officer without a proper handover process. I froze. A drop of coffee fell onto the wooden floor, spreading into a small dark circle. The announcer kept talking, calm and steady, but to me, every word sounded like a quiet knock on a long-closed door. The story was spreading faster than I imagined. Atlas, once a symbol of Seattle's tech scene, was now a public spectacle. I opened my laptop. Social media was flooded with tweets, videos, and memes. Someone wrote, "A $500 million company locked itself out after firing the key holder." Thousands of comments followed, some angry, some laughing, some simply saying, "Karma moves fast." Scrolling down, I found a leaked video from an Atlas meeting. Ethan stood in front of a screen, voice shaking as he tried to explain. Someone had filmed it from the back row with a caption, "When your CEO thinks he can reboot with willpower." I closed it before it ended. My phone rang. Tina. Her voice was rough, hurried. "Ava, are you seeing this? It's chaos. Reporters are swarming the building. Investors are demanding answers. Ethan's losing it." "I see it," I said evenly. "Are you going to say something?" "I know you didn't mean for this to happen, but people are saying you caused the crash." "I don't need to say anything," I replied. "The truth speaks for itself." After the call, I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window. Rain was falling harder, drumming against the glass in a steady rhythm. I opened the morning paper. The headline stretched across the top in bold letters, "Atlas Digital, When Arrogance Defeats Intelligence." The article read, "Sources say the company's late founder, Richard Cole, had entrusted full system authority to an internal expert. The sudden dismissal without procedure may have triggered an automated self-protection mode. I read every word slowly, feeling something rare. Justice arriving quietly, soaked by rain, not through courts or revenge, but through undeniable truth. By noon, a journalist called. "We heard you were responsible for building Atlas's core system. Can you confirm that?" "I don't work there anymore," I said. "But I can tell you this. Every system is designed to protect itself from human error. Do you think Atlas deserves what's happening?" I paused, then answered. "I think everyone deserves the consequences of their own choices." By afternoon, the news had gone national. Analysts were debating, investors were panicking, and Atlas's stock had fallen more than 30%. I felt no triumph, only sadness. Sadness for the hundreds of people whose work had been undone by one man's arrogance. Around 5, an email appeared in my inbox, untitled, from an anonymous address. But I knew the writing style. "Ava, you won. The system's collapsing. They're turning on each other. But be careful. Ethan's trying to spin the story. He might accuse you of sabotage." J. I read it twice. Joe, of course. I closed the laptop and exhaled. I wasn't afraid. I had done nothing illegal. But I knew Ethan. He would do anything to protect his name. He wouldn't accept defeat, not under the glare of public scrutiny. That evening, I walked around the lake. The wind was sharp, carrying the metallic scent of rain. On the stone path, I heard fragments of conversation. "Did you hear about Atlas? Feels like a Hollywood movie." "Yeah, the CEO crashed his own company. They say he fired the wrong person." I walked faster, not wanting to listen. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't mine anymore. It had become something else, a symbol of pride, and what happens when people underestimate those who work in the shadows. When I got home, my inbox was overflowing. Interview requests, messages of thanks from former colleagues, and a few anonymous threats. Someone wrote, "Who do you think you are, destroying a company?" I didn't reply. I simply opened my digital journal and typed one line: "Justice doesn't need an audience." That night, I sat by the window, watching the lights shimmer across the lake. In my mind, I saw Ethan sitting in a conference room, surrounded by tense faces, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. He wouldn't accept defeat. And when men like Ethan are cornered, they don't retreat, they strike back. But striking at the truth is like punching water. It only exhausts you, it weakens you. And when you finally sink, no one will reach out, because you're the one who cut the last rope holding you to reality. Outside, the rain kept falling, thin silver lines against the glass. Everything was unfolding as it should, and for the first time in 12 years, I felt completely at peace. Not because I'd won, but because I no longer had to save something that was never built to survive. 2 weeks after the media storm, the city had grown used to hearing the name Atlas Digital in the morning news. People no longer argued about it. They mentioned it occasionally, like a cautionary tale that had lost its edge. But behind the fading headlines, I knew the company was still falling apart, quietly, slowly, and beyond repair. I sat in a cafe near the harbor, flipping through the morning financial section. A small line at the bottom of page 3 read, "Atlas Digital suspends dividend payments. Chief executive resigns." I didn't need to read further to know who it was: Bryce, Ethan's closest friend, the one who had taken over engineering after Ramish was fired. A week ago, I'd heard he corrupted the main backup while trying to restore the servers. No one left on the team had the patience, or the knowledge, to fix what he'd done. Rain traced pale streaks down the glass. I thought back to Atlas's first days, when my old team and I sat in a cramped room, eating cold pizza and typing through the night. Back then, everyone knew the value of every line of code, every signature, every test. Now it was all replaced by dashboards and empty slogans. Ethan wanted reform, and now his reform was devouring the company from within. That afternoon, Tina called. Her voice sounded exhausted. "Ava, they just cut 40% of the staff. Half of the finance is gone. I'm packing up my desk." "I'm sorry, Tina." "It's not your fault," she sighed. "I just can't believe Ethan could make it this bad. Yesterday, he blamed the entire compliance division, saying the failures came from old protocols you left behind." I paused for a few seconds. If blaming me helps him survive, let him, I said softly. But it won't save Atlas. What are you going to do now? She asked quietly. Nothing, I said. Everything is happening the way it should. After we hung up, I sat still for a long time. Part of me hurt for the people losing their jobs, for the colleagues who had once stood beside me, now being pushed aside. But I knew if I returned to fix it again, the system would never learn how to stand on its own. 3 days later, an email arrived from an address I hadn't seen in years. Richard.Cole@North Stream, capital. My heart tightened. Richard Cole, the founder, Ethan's father. He'd left Atlas 2 years earlier and moved to Oregon. I opened the message. The first line was brief. Ava, I need to see you. Not to place blame, but to understand what really happened. We met at a small cafe by the Columbia River. He looked the same, tall, thin, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, but weary. When he saw me, he stood and offered his hand. You look just like you did the day I left, he said, then sighed. I've read everything. I know Ethan made mistakes, but I never thought it would go this far. You gave him power, I said quietly, but not the knowledge to keep it. He tried to run a system he didn't understand. He nodded, his gaze distant. I know you still hold legal level access, even if you haven't used it. I haven't touched a thing, I said. The system is reacting on its own. It's doing exactly what you asked me to program from the beginning, to protect the company from reckless behavior. Richard sat silently for a long time. Then he said, Ethan doesn't listen to anyone anymore. He's trying to negotiate with Elworth Tech, but they've walked away. The board is considering special supervision. I didn't come to ask you to fix it. I came to ask if it can be fixed. I looked at him, saw in his eyes not greed or anger, but regret. Not for the lost company, but for losing something deeper, trust. No one can save Atlas, I said. Not because the system is broken, but because it no longer has a soul. We sat there listening to the soft slap of water against the shore. Then Richard said quietly, If there's anything you need, I'll help. I smiled. I don't need anything. Just make sure no one else pays for someone else's arrogance. By the time I left the cafe, night had fallen. The last trace of sunset burned red over the river. My chest felt lighter. I had just spoken with the only person left who still understood how to listen. That evening, the news broke. Atlas Board calls emergency meeting. CEO Ethan Cole suspended from duty. Around the same time, an internal email leak showed Ethan blaming everyone, from the legal department to the engineers, to the outdated system left behind by a former employee. But no one believed him anymore. Under the post, hundreds of former staff left public comments sharing stories of the nights we worked together, of the times I protected the company before anyone knew its name. The narrative shifted. No one saw me as the saboteur anymore. They finally understood. I sat by the window, watching the faint reflections of city lights ripple across the lake, and thought, it's all closing now. Ethan might fight a little longer, but once a system loses its structure, willpower alone can't hold it together. Atlas didn't fall because of me. It fell because people forgot that ethics and engineering are two halves of the same foundation. That night, I typed one short line into my journal. When what you build collapses, sometimes it's not destruction, it's purification. I shut the laptop and looked out at the distance, where the Atlas building shimmered faintly through the fog. It no longer glowed like it used to. The lights flickered weakly, like the last breath of a proud giant. I closed my eyes, listening to the rain return. Everything was ending, but this time I felt no regret. A month after Ethan's suspension, the name Atlas Digital had all but vanished from the front pages. Public attention had moved on, the way it always does after a scandal burns out. But behind the mirrored glass towers downtown, quiet negotiations were still unfolding. And then one afternoon, when I thought it was truly over, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, Invitation to Return. The sender was Dana Whitmore, a member of Atlas's board, someone I'd met a few times during compliance audits. The message was short. Ava, we need you. Not to restore Atlas as it was, but to save what's left. I reread the line several times, my chest tightening with mixed feelings. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the past stay buried. But another part, the one that had lived with Atlas for 12 years, couldn't pretend not to care. I didn't want to return to fix Ethan's mistakes. I wanted to help the people still trapped inside them, the ones who never got to choose. 2 days later, I agreed to meet Dana. The meeting took place in a rented conference room on the 13th floor of another building. Atlas's headquarters was still under system lockdown. Dana was as I remembered, sharp eyes, calm voice, and a steadiness that came from surviving chaos. "We've completed the audit," she said. "Ethan didn't just break protocol, he violated multiple legal clauses. Every partner has pulled out. We can't recover any data without your authorization. You're still the only legal name attached to Atlas's root structure." I studied her. "What do you want me to do?" "Help us restart the infrastructure," she replied. "But not for Ethan. The board plans to rebuild from the ground up. You won't answer to anyone. You'll lead the recovery task force with full technical and legal authority." I stayed quiet. Her words brushed against an old wound, not painful, but deep. "I've already left," I said softly. "I'm not sure I still trust myself enough to come back." Dana tilted her head. "You're not coming back to trust, Ava. You're coming back to finish." Something in that sentence stopped me. Maybe she was right. The story had never truly ended. I'd just walked away while it was still burning. I looked out the window at the amber light spilling over the city. "If I agree," I said, "I have conditions. Go on. Ethan has no right to interfere. None. And if I return, Atlas cannot be rebuilt on the same foundation. I'll rewrite everything, from operations to values. It won't be a place of power. It'll be a place of responsibility." Dana nodded. "I think that's what Richard Cole wanted to, if he were still here." I looked at her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I'll do it. But not for Atlas. For the people who once believed in me." 3 weeks later, I walked back into the Atlas building. The rain hadn't changed. It never did in Seattle. The glass doors reflected my face, but something in that reflection was different. I was no longer the quiet engineer who'd been dismissed on a stage. I was someone returning to end a broken cycle. Inside, the lobby was nearly empty. A few new employees greeted me, their eyes full of curiosity and respect. I walked down the corridor and stopped before the old executive hall, the same room where Ethan had once fired me in front of everyone. The stage, the giant screen, the yellow lights, everything was the same. But inside me, there was no anger left, only stillness. Dana appeared beside me. "Ready?" "I've been ready for a long time." We went up to the 12th floor, the main server room. The entire network remained sealed. I placed my hand on the console, inserted the silver USB Ethan once dismissed as obsolete. The screen lit up. "Root authorization detected. Welcome back, A. Clark." A soft blue light pulsed across the rows of machines, the servers humming to life like a deep, steady breath. Dana whispered, "We're alive again." I shook my head. "No, we're beginning again." The work took weeks. I spent days and nights rebuilding, restoring access protocols, revalidating files, signing new legal documents, and training a new team to run the system properly. But this time, I wasn't fixing damage. I was rewriting the relationship between people and their creation. I designed a new layer, the integrity layer. Every critical action in the system now requires two components: data and ethics. It was an algorithm that verified not just the process, but the intent. When I presented the idea, Dana asked, "You think you can program morality?" "I'm not programming morality," I said. "I'm just reminding people that their actions are being recorded by something that doesn't forget." During those weeks, I never saw Ethan. Reports said he was under investigation and likely to lose all executive rights. I didn't feel vindicated, only pity. He'd had everything: opportunity, influence, a legacy. But he lacked the one thing that mattered: humility. As the project neared completion, I received a message from Richard Cole. "I heard you're rewriting Atlas. Thank you. I believe this time it will live the way it was meant to." I didn't reply. Some gratitude doesn't need an answer. On the day the system relaunched, the Atlas building lit up for the first time in months. The server lights blinked in rhythm, and across the monitors appeared the first line of code I'd written for the new beginning. Power lies not in control, but in the ability to keep others from collapsing. I stared at the words for a long moment, breathing deeply. For the first time in years, I felt genuine peace, not because I had won, but because I had finally returned, not for revenge, but for closure. That morning, the sky over Seattle was thick and gray like smoke. I arrived at the Atlas office earlier than usual. The system had been running smoothly for almost 2 weeks. Departments were settling back into their rhythm. No more panic, no more cameras outside the doors. Everything looked calm, but I knew the biggest wave hadn't passed yet. Around 8:30, while I was reviewing the latest security report, Dana walked in. There was hesitation in her eyes. "Ava," she said softly, "Ethan just sent a request for a face-to-face meeting. He says he wants to make things right." I closed the folder in my hands. I thought he was still under suspension. "He is," Dana replied. "But his attorney says Ethan has the right to make a statement before the board votes on permanent dismissal. He wants to meet you here. I can decline if you'd prefer." I was silent for a moment, then said, "It's all right, I'll see him." Dana looked uncertain, as if to make sure I wouldn't waver. I smiled faintly. Sometimes, to truly end something, you have to face the person who started it. The 10th floor conference room still looked the same. Glass walls, a long wooden table, gray swivel chairs. When I entered, Ethan was already there, sitting at the far end. Gone was the polished suit, the confident grin. His face was drawn, his eyes tired. A thick file sat before him beside a cold cup of coffee. I pulled out a chair across from him and kept my voice steady. "What do you want to say to me, Ethan?" He stared at his hands, then looked up. "I guess you've won." "I didn't come here to win," I said. "We're talking about consequences, not victories." Ethan gave a short, hollow laugh. "You know, I once thought I'd be different. I wanted to modernize Atlas, make it better. Turns out I just destroyed what you built." "You didn't destroy it because you wanted progress," I replied quietly. "You destroyed it because you thought you were smarter than the system itself." He said nothing. After a moment, he whispered, "When things started falling apart, I refused to believe it was my fault. I blamed everyone, my father, you, anyone I could. But now I see I never understood anything. I only knew how to give orders. You can still learn," I said, "just not here, and not by blaming others again." He gave a weary smile. "You're always calm, aren't you? Even when they humiliated you, fired you in front of everyone, you still look like this." "I was angry then," I said, "but anger doesn't fix anything." I stayed silent because sometimes silence is the loudest answer. The air grew heavy, wind pressed against the glass, making a sound like a long sigh. Finally, Ethan stood and walked around the table until he was standing in front of me. "I need a chance," he said quietly. "Not to get my title back, but to make things right. I want to speak to the board, and I want you there. Not to defend me, just to confirm that I've learned something." I looked at him for a long time. The arrogance was gone. What stood before me was just a young man finally learning what accountability felt like. I nodded. "I'll come. But don't expect me to speak for you. Just being there is enough," he said. The board meeting took place that afternoon. The room was full, tense. Richard Cole sat in the corner, silent, his expression heavy. When Ethan entered, every eye turned to him. There were no whispers, no ridicule, only quiet expectation. He opened his file and took a deep breath. "I know you've all lost faith in me. I deserve to be removed. But before you vote, I want to say this. I never understood what made Atlas valuable. It wasn't the technology or the capital. It was the people. And I drove away the one person who understood that better than anyone." He looked toward me. His eyes held no plea, only acknowledgement. "Ava didn't have to save this company," he went on. "She'd already saved it many times without anyone noticing. And this time, she didn't need to lift a finger. She just had to leave, and we collapsed on our own." The room was silent. Richard Cole tilted his head slightly, sadness in his eyes. Dana, sitting beside me, gave a faint nod. Ethan paused, then said, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to say, if Atlas ever has a future, it should be built on the foundation she set: honesty and responsibility." He closed the folder and lifted his head. I hereby resign, effective immediately. I didn't speak. Only when he walked out did I finally exhale. Richard Cole turned to me, his voice rough. Maybe for the first time he's grown up. Sometimes, I said, people only grow up after they've lost everything. The board accepted his resignation. When I left the room, the sky outside was still gray, but something inside me felt lighter. Whatever had existed between Ethan and me was no longer resentment. It had become a lesson. A costly one, but necessary. Before leaving the building, I stopped by the old stage where I'd once been fired. It was quiet now, the soft yellow light spilling across rows of empty chairs. I thought maybe this was where everything was meant to begin and end. A circle closing. I stepped outside. The rain hadn't stopped, but it no longer felt cold. I tilted my head back, letting a few drops fall on my face. Inside, there was no anger left, only understanding. Ethan had lost everything, but learned to take responsibility. I had lost years, but kept myself intact. And maybe that was the real victory, after all. 6 months after that final meeting, Seattle slipped into a rare spring full of sunlight. I moved out of my old apartment by Lake Union and into a smaller place in Queen Anne, surrounded by green trees and early opening cafes. From my balcony, I could still see the Atlas Tower in the distance, tall, silent, reborn. But this time, it didn't weigh on me. There was peace, as if time had finally softened everything that once hurt. Atlas had changed. Dana had been appointed interim CEO, and she asked me to stay on as an independent advisor to the restructuring team. I agreed, but only for 6 months, just long enough to complete the handover and make sure the new integrity layer was stable. I didn't work there every day anymore. I only came when needed, like a quiet observer watching from the outside. One morning, Dana called me to the 12th floor, the heart of the old system. She stood by the glass wall, sunlight catching her face, a mix of resolve and relief. "You should see this," Dana said, pointing to the monitor. On the screen was a single message. Atlas Digital. Compliance certification. Approved. I stared at the line for a moment. After all the chaos, the company had finally regained its federal compliance certification, the one that had been suspended for 8 months. "So it's done," I murmured. Dana smiled. "No, Ava, this is just the beginning. But we wouldn't have made it here without you." I shook my head slightly. All I did was let the system speak for itself. You're the ones who finally listened. Dana went quiet, then smiled again. "We didn't just listen, we learned to respect it." I left the office after the short meeting. As I passed through the lobby, I saw new faces, young, bright, full of energy. They didn't know who I was, just greeted me politely like any visitor. I didn't feel sad. In truth, I liked it that way. Atlas was being rewritten, and I was no longer at its center. On my way home, I stopped at a small cafe by the lake, the same one I had sat in the day after I was fired. Same wooden table by the window, same rich smell of coffee, same soft jazz humming in the background. I ordered a latte, opened my notebook, and wrote a few lines. Some things have to collapse for us to see the strength of their foundation. Some people have to leave so others can learn how to stand. I paused, looked out at the still water. Sunlight rippled across the lake, golden and soft. Then the door opened and someone walked in. Ethan. He looked different, simpler, calmer. No designer suit, no arrogance. Just a quiet man carrying the weight of lessons learned. He ordered a coffee, and when he saw me, he stopped. After a brief hesitation, he walked over. "May I sit?" "Of course," I said, nodding. We sat in silence for a few moments, the sound of a spoon clinking against porcelain between us. Then Ethan spoke. "I'm working for a small startup now. It's nothing big, but I'm learning. I've realized the hardest part of leadership isn't leading others, it's learning to lead yourself." I smiled. "You're learning the same lesson I did, just 10 years later." Ethan nodded. "I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for not destroying me when you could have." "I never wanted to destroy you," I said. "I just wanted you to see what power makes people forget." He smiled, a quiet, genuine smile. "Maybe sometimes people have to lose everything to learn how to start over, and sometimes," I said, They have to start over without being afraid of losing anything at all. He fell silent, staring out at the lake. A moment later, he stood and offered his hand. I shook it, light as air. When he left, I watched him walk into the sunlight, his figure small against the busy streets, and I knew our story had truly ended. No bitterness, no debts, just two people who had stood on opposite sides and finally moved past it. That afternoon, I went home and turned on my laptop one last time to check the Atlas system. On the screen appeared a new startup message, Atlas Integrity System V2.0, designed by A. Clark. I looked at it, smiled, and typed the final command, log out. The screen went dark, reflecting my face. No longer an engineer, no longer a gatekeeper, just a woman who had walked through a storm and learned that sometimes the greatest power lies in knowing when to let go. I stepped out onto the balcony. Dusk settled over the city, sunlight glinting off the water one last time. I closed my eyes, breathing in the soft wind. And in that moment, I understood more clearly than ever. Endings aren't losses, they're openings. In the distance, the Atlas Tower still stood bright, its lights glowing in the early summer night. And I knew this time it would stand firm, not because of one person, but because of the lesson everyone had learned together. I watched the sunset shimmer across the lake, a calm settling deep in my chest. The story of me, of Ethan, of Atlas, it was over. But somewhere within it, there was still something worth remembering. If it were you, humiliated in front of a crowd, what would you do? Fight back, walk away, or stay silent and let time speak for you? Which moment in this story stayed with you the most? Leave a comment below. I rate everyone. And if you believe that justice doesn't always come through revenge, but through patience and integrity, stay. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next journey, where truth always finds its way back.